Blood painted the snow crimson as Bridget Thornwood's bare hands grasped at the frozen ground, her husband Ellie's roars still echoing in her ears. The blizzard of 1879 howled across Colorado's Front Range, the worst winter storm locals had ever witnessed. The temperature had plummeted well below zero, turning the landscape into a frozen wasteland that showed no mercy to those caught unprepared. "Don't you dare come back." Ellie had screamed, his alcohol-soured breath burning her nostrils as he shoved her through the doorway of their homestead, 5 miles outside Colorado City. "Not until you learn your place." The door slammed behind her with such force that it shook the small cabin. Bridget had fallen from the porch into nearly 2 feet of snow, wearing only her house dress and a thin shawl. No coat, no boots, nothing to protect her from the merciless elements that had already claimed 3 lives in the county that week. Now she staggered forward, each step becoming heavier than the last. The snow had soaked through her dress, the fabric freezing against her skin. Her bare feet were beyond pain, a terrifying numbness had set in. The wind cut through her like knives, stealing her breath and her hope with each gust. Ellie's rage had been building for days as their food stores dwindled and his whiskey ran dry. When she'd suggested selling his prized hunting rifle to buy provisions, something in him had snapped. The back of his hand had connected with her cheek before she could even react. Then came the pushing, the shouting, and finally, the door slamming behind her. 5 years of marriage to a man who had once courted her with gentle words and promises of a beautiful life together. 5 years watching him transform into something unrecognizable. A transformation accelerated by whiskey and disappointment when their small ranch failed to prosper. Bridget had no idea how long she'd been walking. Time seemed to blur in the whiteout conditions. She knew only that she had to find shelter or die. The freezing cold was becoming almost comforting now, a deadly lullaby tempting her to lie down and rest. She fought against the urge, knowing it meant certain death. Through the curtain of swirling snow, she saw a faint golden glow in the distance. A window, shelter, hope. Her legs moved mechanically now, no longer responding to conscious thought. The light grew closer, revealing the silhouette of a modest cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth within. With the last of her strength, Bridget stumbled up the short path to the door, her frozen fingers barely able to form a fist to knock. She managed 1 weak rap before her body finally surrendered to the cold. As consciousness slipped away, the last thing she heard was the creak of the door opening and a man's startled voice cutting through the howl of the wind. Good God Almighty! Lucas Northcott had been stoking his fire when he heard the faint knock at his door. Living alone 5 miles from Colorado City meant visitors were rare enough in good weather. In a blizzard like this, it was unheard of. His hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip as he approached the door. The sight that greeted him was the last thing he expected. A woman collapsed on his doorstep, her lips blue, her skin nearly as white as the snow she lay in. Without hesitation, Lucas holstered his gun and scooped her up in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her body stiff with cold. "Madam, can you hear me?" Lucas kicked the door shut behind him and carried her directly to the fireplace where flames leapt high in the stone hearth. When she didn't respond, fear gripped his heart. He'd seen men die from exposure during his time riding with a cattle outfit in Wyoming. The woman in his arms was dangerously close to that threshold. Lucas laid her gently on the bearskin rug before the fire. Up close, he could see she was young, perhaps 25, with chestnut hair and delicate features that seemed familiar, though he couldn't place her. Her dress was soaked through and frozen in places, her feet bare and alarmingly white. "I'm sorry, madam," he muttered as he began unlacing her frozen dress. Propriety be damned, he needed to get her out of the wet clothes or she'd never warm up. He worked quickly and respectfully, averting his eyes as much as possible while he wrapped her in warm blankets and his spare flannel shirt. He'd been a cowboy for 15 years. working ranches from Texas to Montana, before finally saving enough to buy this small piece of land 2 years ago. In all that time, he'd learned enough about survival to know this woman needed more than just warm blankets. Lucas heated water in the kettle and added a spoonful of honey and whiskey. When it was ready, he gently lifted her head and tipped a small amount between her pale lips. Most dribbled down her chin, but he persisted, patient and careful. After what seemed like hours, her eyelids fluttered. A soft moan escaped her lips. "That's it," he encouraged, relief flooding through him. "Come back now." Her eyes opened fully, a startling deep blue, like the Colorado sky on a clear summer day. For a moment they were unfocused, confused. Then panic set in. She tried to sit up, only to fall back with a whimper of pain as circulation returned to her frozen limbs. "Easy now," Lucas said, his voice low and calm like he used with skittish horses. "You're safe here. The storm's still raging, but you're inside and warming up." "Where?" Her voice was barely audible, cracked and dry. "My cabin, about 5 miles northwest of Colorado City. I'm Lucas Northcott." He helped her take another sip of the warm honey and whiskey mixture. "Can you tell me your name, madam?" "Bridget," she whispered. "Bridget Thornwood." Recognition dawned on Lucas. He'd seen her in town a few times, always in the company of her husband. Thornwood, a mean drunk with a reputation for having a heavy hand and a quick temper. Lucas had never spoken to her directly, but Colorado City wasn't large enough for people to remain strangers for long. "Mrs. Thornwood," he acknowledged with a nod. "Can you tell me what happened? How you came to be at my door in this blizzard without so much as a coat or boots?" Bridget's eyes filled with tears. She turned her face toward the fire, the orange glow illuminating a purpling bruise on her cheekbone that Lucas hadn't noticed before. "My husband," she said simply, the words hanging in the air between them. Lucas's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "I see. You're safe here, Mrs. Thornwood. The storm's likely to last through tomorrow at least. You can rest and recover." "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes already closing again. Lucas watched her for a moment longer, noting the rise and fall of her chest beneath the blankets. She was beautiful, even in this state, perhaps more so for the quiet strength he sensed beneath her fragile appearance. A woman who had walked miles in a blizzard in bare feet, rather than stay one more minute with the man who'd struck her. He added another log to the fire and settled into the rocking chair nearby. He wouldn't sleep much tonight, too concerned with keeping the fire blazing and watching for any signs of worsening in his unexpected guest. Outside, the wind screamed like a wounded animal, rattling the windows of the small cabin. Inside, the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the woman who had literally frozen on his doorstep. Bridget drifted in and out of consciousness throughout the night. When lucid, she was acutely aware of the searing pain as her extremities thawed. Her feet and hands felt as though they were being held directly in flames. Each time she whimpered or cried out, a gentle voice would soothe her, and strong hands would adjust her blankets or help her sip water. By morning, the worst of the pain had subsided, though her body felt like one massive bruise. The blizzard continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin, a delicious smell was filling the air. Bridget opened her eyes fully to see Lucas Northcott standing at a cast-iron stove, stirring something in a pot. He was tall, over 6 feet with broad shoulders, and the lean, muscular build of a man who worked hard for his living. His hair was dark brown, almost black, with strands of silver at the temples despite him appearing to be in his mid-30s. A neatly trimmed beard framed a face that was handsome in a rugged way, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. "Good morning," he said, noticing she was awake. Feeling any better, Bridget tried to sit up, wincing as her body protested. "Yes, thank you. I don't know how to thank you properly, Mr. Northcott. You saved my life." Lucas shook his head as he ladled what appeared to be oatmeal into a bowl. Anyone would have done the same. He brought the bowl over, along with a cup of coffee. Think you can manage some breakfast? You need to get your strength back." Bridget nodded, suddenly aware of the gnawing hunger in her stomach. She'd had little to eat the day before. Ellie had thrown her plate against the wall during dinner, claiming the stew was too salty. As she ate, Lucas busied himself around the cabin, giving her space while remaining close enough to assist if needed. The cabin was small but tidy and surprisingly comfortable. A single room with the bed pushed against one wall, the kitchen area opposite, and the living space in between centered around the stone fireplace. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with more volumes than she'd expect to find in a cowboy's home. "Thank you for the food," she said when she'd finished, feeling more human with warm sustenance in her belly. "And for everything else. I know it wasn't proper, but no need to speak of that," Lucas interrupted gently. "Nothing improper happened here, just one human helping another in need." Bridget pulled the blankets closer around herself, suddenly very aware that beneath them she wore only his flannel shirt. "My clothes," hanging to dry by the fire, they were soaked through. He hesitated, then added, "I have some spare trousers that might fit you with a belt and a spare shirt. Not exactly ladies' attire, but they're warm and dry. That would be most appreciated." He gathered the clothes and set them on the foot of the bed, then turned his back to give her privacy. "I'll just tend to the horses while you change. Take your time, Mrs. Thornwood." "Bridget," she said softly. "Please call me Bridget," he nodded without turning around. "Bridget, then. I'm Lucas." He pulled on his heavy coat and hat. "I'll knock before I come back in." After he left, Bridget gingerly got to her feet, testing her balance. Her feet were tender but not as painful as she'd feared. The trousers were comically large, but with the belt cinched tight and the cuffs rolled up several times, they would do. The shirt was warm flannel, similar to the one she already wore. She was just finishing dressing when a knock came at the door. "Come in," she called, now decent and seated on the edge of the bed. Lucas entered, bringing a blast of cold air with him. He stomped snow from his boots and hung his coat by the door. "Storm's showing no signs of letting up," he reported. "Might be stuck here another day at least." Bridget's stomach clenched with anxiety. "I've imposed on you too much already." "Perhaps if you could lend me some boots, I could try to." "Absolutely not," Lucas cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Even with proper gear, no one should be out in this. Besides, your feet need time to heal. You're lucky you didn't lose any toes to frostbite." Bridget looked down at her hands, which were red and painful but intact. "I don't know what I'll do when the storm passes," she admitted quietly. "I can't go back to him." Lucas took a seat in the rocking chair, keeping a respectful distance. "No, I don't reckon you should." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I've seen your husband in town, heard things too. Can't say I'm surprised by what happened, though I'm sorry for it all the same." Tears welled in Bridget's eyes. 5 years, she whispered. "He wasn't always like this. When we married, he was kind, ambitious. He had dreams of building a cattle ranch to rival the biggest in Colorado." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But the land was poor, the winters harsh. Each failure made him drink more, and the drink made him mean." "That's no excuse for putting hands on a woman," Lucas said firmly, "or throwing her out in a blizzard to die." "No," Bridget agreed. "It isn't." A silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. Finally, Lucas spoke. "When the storm passes, I'll take you to town. Sheriff Morris is a good man. He can help you figure out what comes next. Maybe your family." "I have no family," Bridget interrupted. "My parents died of fever 3 years ago. I have a sister in St. Louis, but we haven't spoken in years." She didn't approve of Ellie. A bitter laugh escaped her. "Turns out she was right." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "Well, one step at a time. First we get through this storm, then we get to town and talk to the sheriff. After that, well, Colorado City has good people. Someone will help you get on your feet." "Thank you," Bridget said, meeting his gaze directly. "You're a good man, Mr. North Lucas." He shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable with the praise. "Just doing what's right." As the day progressed, Bridget's strength returned. Lucas gave her a pair of thick wool socks to protect her tender feet, and she insisted on helping with small tasks around the cabin. They prepared a simple stew for dinner, working side by side in comfortable silence. That evening, as they sat before the fire drinking coffee, Bridget found herself studying Lucas. There was a quiet confidence about him, a self-sufficiency that came from years of relying on himself. Yet there was gentleness too, evident in how carefully he tended the fire and how he spoke in low, measured tones. "Have you lived here long?" she asked, breaking the companionable silence. Lucas shook his head. "Just 2 years. Spent most of my life drifting from ranch to ranch following the work. Wyoming, Montana, Texas, I've punched cows all over the West. Finally decided it was time to put down roots. Do you have family?" "Not anymore. Lost my parents when I was young. Raised mostly by my grandfather until he passed when I was 16. Been on my own since then." He took a sip of coffee. "What about you? How did you end up in Colorado?" Bridget gazed into the fire, memories washing over her. "I grew up in Kansas. My father was a schoolteacher. After he and mother died, I had no means to keep our home. Eli was passing through. He'd been to Colorado and spoke so beautifully about the mountains and the opportunities. He courted me for 2 months, then asked me to marry him and come west." She sighed. "I was 22 and facing a life of spinsterhood or working as a seamstress for pennies. His offer seemed like salvation." Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns." "Yes," she agreed softly. "Though I never imagined I'd end up half-frozen on a stranger's doorstep." "Nor did I imagine finding a half-frozen woman on my doorstep," Lucas replied with a small smile. "Yet here we are." "Here we are," Bridget echoed, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the fire. That night, Lucas insisted Bridget take the bed while he made a pallet on the floor near the fireplace. Despite her protests, he was adamant. "I've slept under the stars with nothing but a saddle for a pillow more times than I can count," he assured her. "This is luxury by comparison." Bridget eventually relented, too exhausted to argue further. As she drifted toward sleep, wrapped in blankets that smelled faintly of pine and leather, she realized it was the first time in years she hadn't fallen asleep afraid of what the morning might bring. The blizzard continued through the next day, keeping them confined to the cabin. They passed the time with conversation and simple tasks. Lucas showed Bridget his small collection of books, novels by Mark Twain and Charles Dickens, poetry by Walt Whitman, and practical guides to ranching and horse training. "People are often surprised I read," he commented as she examined a well-worn copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. "Why?" Bridget asked. He shrugged. "Cowboys aren't known for their literacy, I suppose, but my grandfather was educated. He taught me to read before I even started school and impressed upon me the importance of feeding my mind as well as my body." He sounds like a wise man. He was. A shadow crossed Lucas's face. "He'd be disappointed to see how little I've accomplished with the education he gave me." "I disagree," Bridget said firmly. "You've built a life for yourself. This land, this home, it's something to be proud of." Lucas looked around the modest cabin as if seeing it through new eyes. "Perhaps you're right." By the 3rd day, the storm finally began to abate. The wind died down to occasional gusts, and the constant curtain of snow thinned to sporadic flurries. Lucas ventured outside to check his small herd of cattle and reported that the drifts were deep but manageable. "We should be able to make it to town tomorrow if the weather holds," he told Bridget over lunch. "The main road should be passable by then." Bridget nodded, trying to hide the anxiety his words provoked. The idea of facing Eli again, even with the sheriff's protection, filled her with dread. More than that, she realized she wasn't ready to leave the safety and comfort she'd found in Lucas's cabin. During their days together, something had shifted between them. The initial awkwardness had given way to an easy companionship. They worked together seamlessly, anticipating each other's movements in the small space, laughing at shared jokes, discussing books and ideas. Bridget found herself noticing the way the corners of Lucas's eyes crinkled when he smiled, how his hands were rough but always gentle, how his voice deepened when he spoke of things he cared about. That evening, as they sat before the fire for what would likely be their last night together, Bridget gathered her courage. "Lucas," she began hesitantly, "I want to thank you again not just for saving my life but for these past few days. You've shown me a kindness I'd forgotten existed." He looked up from the piece of wood he'd been whittling. "No need for thanks. It's been nice having company." "What will happen when we reach town?" she asked, the question that had been weighing on her mind finally spoken aloud. Lucas set down his knife and wood. "Sheriff Morris will want to speak with you about what happened, Illy. He'll face consequences for what he did. Attempted murder at the very least." Bridget shuddered at the word murder, though she knew it was accurate. If Lucas hadn't found her when he did, she would have died in the snow. "And after that?" she pressed. "That's for you to decide," Lucas said gently. "Colorado City has a small hotel where you could stay while you figure things out. Mrs. Peterson, who runs the general store, might need help, or perhaps you could find work at the school." "And if I didn't want to stay in town?" The words were out before she could reconsider them. Lucas's eyes met hers, a question in their depths. "Where would you want to go?" Bridget took a deep breath. "I don't know, somewhere I could start fresh, somewhere safe." She hesitated, then added very softly, "Somewhere like here." The cabin grew so quiet that Bridget could hear the soft ticking of the clock on the mantel. Lucas's expression was unreadable as he studied her face. "Bridget," he finally said, his voice low and serious, "you've been through a terrible ordeal. You're still healing not just in body but in spirit. I wouldn't want you to make any decisions now that you might regret later." "I understand," she said, feeling foolish for having spoken so boldly. "Of course you're right. I apologize for being presumptuous." "No," Lucas said quickly, leaning forward. "That's not what I meant. He ran a hand through his hair, searching for words. "What I'm trying to say is that you deserve time to heal, to find your footing again. And I." He took a breath. "I would be lying if I said I hadn't enjoyed your company these past days, more than enjoyed it." Hope flickered in Bridget's chest. "Truly, truly," he confirmed, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "This cabin hasn't felt so much like a home since I built it. Having you here talking, cooking, just sitting quietly by the fire, it's been the most pleasant days I can remember in a long time." "For me as well," Bridget admitted. Lucas shifted in his seat, his expression growing more serious. "But there's Illy to consider. He won't take kindly to what happens next, however it unfolds. And until that situation is resolved, your safety is my primary concern." Bridget nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words despite the disappointment they brought. "You're right, of course." "Let's take it one step at a time," Lucas suggested gently. "First, we get to town and speak with the sheriff, then we ensure your immediate safety and well-being. After that, when you've had time to consider all your options, we can talk about what comes next." "A sensible approach," Bridget agreed, managing a small smile despite the uncertainty churning inside her. They fell silent after that, each lost in their own thoughts as they watched the flames dance in the fireplace. The comfortable companionship remained, but now there was something else between them, an awareness, a possibility, a future not yet determined but perhaps beginning to take shape. Morning arrived clear and bright, the sun reflecting blindingly off the pristine snow that blanketed the landscape. After a quick breakfast, Lucas harnessed his team to the sleigh while Bridget bundled up in borrowed clothes, including a coat that dwarfed her frame and boots stuffed with rags to make them fit. "It's not the latest fashion," Lucas joked as he helped her into the sleigh, "but it will keep you warm." The journey to Colorado City took longer than usual, with the horses having to navigate drifts that in places reached their chests. Lucas handled the team expertly, finding the easiest path through the transformed terrain. Bridget sat close beside him, sharing the warmth of a buffalo robe across their laps. As they crested the final hill and the town came into view, Bridget felt her anxiety return full force. The neat rows of buildings, the church steeple, the scattered homes with smoke rising from chimney, it all seemed both familiar and foreign after her ordeal. "Remember," Lucas said quietly, sensing her tension, "you're not alone in this." She gave him a grateful look, drawing strength from his steady presence. Their arrival in town caused an immediate stir. People emerged from shops and homes to stare as Lucas guided the sleigh down the main street toward the sheriff's office. Bridget kept her eyes fixed ahead, ignoring the whispers and pointing fingers. Sheriff James Morris was a tall, thin man with a salt and pepper mustache and keen eyes that missed little. He ushered them into his office, listening intently as Bridget recounted the events leading up to Lucas finding her at his door. "This is a serious matter, Mrs. Thornwood," the sheriff said when she'd finished. "What your husband did constitutes attempted murder, plain and simple. Even if he claims he expected you to go to a neighbor's house, the nearest one is over a mile away. No reasonable person would expect anyone to survive that journey in such conditions without proper clothing." "What happens now?" Lucas asked. "I'll send my deputy out to the Thornwood place to bring Ellie in," Sheriff Morris replied. "In the meantime, Mrs. Thornwood needs somewhere safe to stay." He looked at Bridget thoughtfully. "The hotel would be the obvious choice, but Ellie would know to look for you there first if he somehow evades us." "She can stay with us," a voice said from the doorway. They turned to see Martha Peterson, the plump, gray-haired owner of the general store, standing there with a determined expression. Her husband Harold, tall and thin where she was short and round, stood beside her. "I couldn't impose," Bridget began. "Nonsense," Martha interrupted. "Harold and I have that big house all to ourselves since our children moved away, plenty of room, and no one would think to look for you there." Sheriff Morris nodded approvingly. "That would be ideal if you're comfortable with the arrangement, Mrs. Thornwood." Bridget looked to Lucas, who gave her an encouraging nod. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Peterson. Thank you." "It's settled then," Martha said briskly. "Harold, go tell Deputy Evans about Ellie Thornwood while I get Mrs. Thornwood settled. Lucas, you're welcome to come for supper later if you'd like to check on her." Within the hour, Bridget found herself in the Petersons' comfortable home, wearing a borrowed dress from their daughter and sitting at their kitchen table with a cup of hot tea. Martha bustled around, preparing a late lunch and chattering about town gossip as if hosting a woman who had nearly frozen to death 3 days earlier was an everyday occurrence. "Everyone in town knows Ellie Thornwood has a mean streak," Martha confided as she set a plate of sandwiches on the table. "Harold has had to throw him out of the store more than once for causing a disturbance. But what he did to you," she shook her head in disgust. "Well, he'll face justice now." "I hope so," Bridget said quietly. "I just want to be free of him." Martha patted her hand. "And you will be, dear. Colorado may be a territory still finding its footing, but we don't tolerate men who abuse their wives." Later that afternoon, Deputy Evans returned to town with Ellie Thornwood in custody. The news spread quickly, reaching the Peterson home as Bridget was helping Martha prepare supper. "They say he didn't even deny it," Harold reported, hanging his hat by the door. "Just kept saying you deserved it for being disobedient." Bridget's hands trembled slightly as she continued chopping carrots. "That sounds like Ellie." "Well, he's cooling his heels in a cell now," Harold assured her. "Sheriff says he'll be transferred to Denver for trial once the roads are passable. Attempted murder carries a hefty sentence in these parts." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Harold answered it to find Lucas standing there, hat in hand, his expression serious. "Evening, Harold. I came to see how Mrs. Thornwood is faring and to share some news." Bridget looked up, her heart quickening at the sight of him. Even after only a few hours apart, she found herself relieved to see his familiar face. "Lucas," she greeted him with a smile. "Please come in." He stepped inside, nodding respectfully to Martha before turning his attention to Bridget. "I've just come from the sheriff's office. Ellie is in custody, but—" He hesitated. "But what?" Bridget prompted, anxiety creeping into her voice. "He's making threats, says when he gets out he'll find you. Claims no court will convict a man for disciplining his wife." Lucas's jaw tightened. Sheriff Morris doesn't take such talk lightly, but I thought you should know. Bridget sank into a chair, the weight of Ellie's threats pressing down on her. Even now, locked in a cell, he was still trying to control her through fear. Martha made a disapproving noise. That man has a reckoning coming. The judge won't look kindly on what he did, threats or no threats. No, Lucas agreed, but these things take time. The circuit judge won't be through for at least a month, and that's assuming the weather cooperates. A month, Bridget whispered, dismayed. Lucas knelt beside her chair, his voice gentle but firm. Bridget, listen to me, you're safe here. The Petersons' home is secure and the whole town knows what happened. No one will let Ellie near you, she nodded, trying to draw strength from his confidence. I know, it's just the idea of waiting, of living with this hanging over me. I understand, Lucas said softly, but you're not alone. Remember that? The warmth in his eyes as he said those words gave Bridget courage. She straightened her shoulders and managed a small smile. You're right. I survived a blizzard in bare feet. I can survive this too. Lucas smiled back, pride evident in his expression. That's the spirit. Martha, who had been watching this exchange with interest, cleared her throat. Lucas, you'll stay for supper, won't you? I've made plenty. I'd be honored, Mrs. Peterson, thank you. The meal that followed was surprisingly pleasant, with Harold sharing amusing stories about the general store and Martha peppering Lucas with questions about his ranch. Bridget found herself relaxing, even laughing at times, the specter of Ellie temporarily pushed to the background. As the evening drew to a close, Lucas prepared to depart. I should get back before it's fully dark, he explained. The horses don't like navigating drifts at night. Of course, Bridget said, following him to the door. Thank you for coming to check on me. I'll be back tomorrow, he promised. And Bridget. He lowered his voice so only she could hear. What we spoke about last night about the future, I meant what I said. When this is all settled, we'll talk again. Her heart fluttered at his words. I'll hold you to that, Lucas Northcott. He smiled, the expression transforming his face, making him look younger and carefree. I'm counting on it. After he left, Bridget returned to the kitchen to help Martha with the dishes. The older woman hummed as she worked, occasionally glancing at Bridget with a knowing look. That Lucas Northcott is quite a man, Martha commented casually. Keeps to himself mostly, but always fair in his dealings. Harold says he pays his bills on time and never haggles over prices. High praise indeed, Bridget replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. Martha wasn't fooled. He looks at you like you hung the moon, you know. Bridget nearly dropped the plate she was drying. Mrs. Peterson? Oh, call me Martha, dear, and don't look so shocked. I may be old, but my eyes work just fine. She handed Bridget another wet plate. The way I see it, God works in mysterious ways. Sometimes it takes walking through hell to find the path to heaven. Bridget considered this, thinking of the terrible journey through the blizzard that had led her to Lucas's door. Perhaps you're right. Course I am, Martha said confidently. Now let's finish these dishes. Tomorrow's another day, and from the looks of things, it might be a brighter one than you've had in a while. That night, lying in the comfortable bed in the Petersons' guest room, Bridget allowed herself to hope for the first time in years. The road ahead would not be easy. There was Ellie's trial to face, and her own uncertain future to determine. But for the first time, she wasn't facing these challenges alone. The following weeks fell into a pattern. Lucas would ride into town every few days, ostensibly to buy supplies but primarily to check on Bridget. These visits became the highlight of her days. Sometimes they would simply talk at the Petersons' kitchen table. Other times they would take short walks through town, weather permitting. Bridget found work helping Martha at the general store, which not only gave her a small income but also integrated her into the community. Many townsfolk were sympathetic to her situation, having witnessed Ellie's volatile behavior themselves over the years. You're doing remarkably well, Doctor. Wilson commented during a follow-up examination 3 weeks after her ordeal. No lasting damage from the frostbite, though I'm still amazed you didn't lose any toes. I have Lucas to thank for that, Bridget replied. He knew exactly what to do. The doctor nodded thoughtfully. Northcott's a good man, quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but he knows his business. He made a note in his book. The jury trial is set for next month when Judge Parker arrives. Are you prepared to testify? Bridget took a deep breath. I am, I have to be. That's the spirit, Doctor. Wilson encouraged, and after the trial, have you given thought to what comes next? It was a question Bridget had been pondering constantly. I have some ideas, she said carefully, but much depends on the outcome of the trial. One unusually mild day in late February, Lucas suggested they ride out to his ranch. The cabin will seem different in daylight, he said with a small smile. And I'd like to show you the land, if you're interested, that is. Bridget eagerly accepted, and Martha provided a knowing smile as she lent Bridget a riding habit for the excursion. Enjoy yourself, dear. You deserve a pleasant day. The ride out to Lucas's property was breathtaking. The snow still blanketed much of the landscape, but the bright sunshine and blue skies transformed it into a glittering wonderland rather than the deadly trap it had been during the blizzard. Lucas pointed out landmarks as they rode a particular stand of pines, the creek that ran through his property, the distant mountains that turned purple in the sunset. His pride in his land was evident in every word. It's beautiful, Bridget said sincerely as they approached the cabin. In daylight, it looked even more welcoming than she remembered, a solid structure built with care, smoke curling invitingly from the chimney where a banked fire waited. Inside, memories flooded back of pain and fear, yes, but also of kindness and growing connection. Lucas built up the fire while Bridget removed her coat and gloves. It feels strange to be back, she admitted, looking around the familiar space. Like returning to the scene of both a nightmare and a dream. Lucas nodded in understanding. I've thought of you every day since you left. The cabin seems emptier somehow. Their eyes met, and Bridget felt a jolt of connection between them. Lucas took a step toward her, then hesitated. Bridget, he began, his voice rough with emotion, I know the timing is all wrong. You're still married, still healing from what Ali did. But I can't help how I feel. How do you feel? She asked softly, her heart pounding. Like I've been waiting my whole life without knowing what I was waiting for, he answered simply. Until you appeared at my door, tears welled in Bridget's eyes. Oh, Lucas. I'm not asking for anything now, he hastened to add. Just, when this is all over, when you're truly free and have had time to consider what you want for your future, I hope you might consider a future that includes me. Bridget crossed the small distance between them and, with courage born of certainty, placed her hand on his cheek. I already have. Lucas covered her hand with his own, his eyes searching hers. You have. From the moment I woke up in this cabin, wrapped in your blankets and cared for with such gentleness, I knew you were different from any man I'd ever known. She smiled through her tears. These past weeks have only confirmed what I already felt. You are a good man, Lucas Northcott. The kind of man I had given up believing existed. Slowly, reverently, Lucas leaned down until his forehead rested against hers. When you're free, he whispered, I'll court you properly if you'll allow it. I'll do more than allow it, Bridget whispered back. I'll welcome it with all my heart. They remained that way for a long moment, not kissing, both understanding that line couldn't be crossed while she was still legally tied to another, but sharing a connection that transcended physical touch. A promise. A beginning. The trial of Thornwood began on a crisp March morning. The whole town seemed to have turned out, packing the makeshift courtroom set up in the town hall. Judge Parker, a stern-faced man with piercing eyes and a reputation for fairness, presided. Bridget sat rigid with tension as Ali was led in, his hands shackled. He looked thinner, his face shadowed with stubble, but his eyes still burned with the same anger she remembered. When those eyes found her in the crowd, she forced herself not to flinch. Lucas sat directly behind her, a solid presence lending her strength. The Petersons flanked her on either side, Martha occasionally patting her hand in encouragement. The proceedings began with the prosecutor, a young but sharp-witted lawyer named Bennett laying out the charges against Illy: attempted murder, assault, and battery. Illy's court-appointed defense attorney, a nervous man named Simmons, argued that his client had simply been disciplining his wife and had expected her to go to a neighbor's home. When Bridget was called to testify, she rose on shaky legs but found her voice grew stronger as she recounted the events of that terrible night. She spoke of the 5 years of escalating abuse, of Illy's drinking and rage, and finally of being thrown into the blizzard with no coat or boots. "And how far is the nearest neighbor to your homestead, Mrs. Thornwood?" Bennett asked. "The closest is the Wilsons, about 1.5 miles east," Bridget answered. "Mr. Northcott's cabin is approximately 5 miles northwest." "And in your condition barefoot, dressed only in a house dress and shawl, in a blizzard, do you believe your husband expected you to survive the journey to either location?" Bridget met Illy's glare unflinchingly. "No, sir. I believe he expected me to die." During cross-examination, Simmons tried to suggest that Bridget had been unfaithful, that she had provoked Illy's anger, that she had exaggerated the danger of her situation. His insinuations drew murmurs of disapproval from the packed courtroom. "No further questions," Simmons finally said, returning to his seat in defeat. Lucas testified next, describing finding Bridget unconscious and nearly frozen at his door. Dr. Wilson followed, providing medical evidence of Bridget's injuries and the life-threatening nature of her exposure. By the time the prosecution rested its case, the mood in the courtroom was somber and tense. Illy took the stand in his own defense, his testimony a mixture of self-justification and thinly veiled threats. "A man has the right to discipline his wife," he insisted. "She was disrespectful, questioning my decisions. I just wanted to teach her a lesson, show her she needed me. I figured she'd go to the Wilsons and come back home properly chastened." "In a blizzard, without proper clothing," Bennett pressed during cross-examination. "She's always been dramatic," Illy sneered. "Probably took off her coat herself just to make me look bad." A ripple of disbelief ran through the courtroom. The jury, 12 men from Colorado City and surrounding farms, deliberated for less than an hour before returning with their verdict: guilty on all charges. Judge Parker's sentence was swift and severe. "Illy Thornwood, your actions demonstrate a callous disregard for human life, specifically the life of the woman you vowed to protect. I sentence you to 15 years in the territorial prison at Cannon City." As the bailiff led Illy away, he lunged toward Bridget, his face contorted with rage. "This isn't over," he shouted. "You're still my wife. I'll find you when I get out." Lucas was on his feet instantly, positioning himself between Bridget and Illy, but the bailiff and sheriff quickly restrained the prisoner and dragged him from the courtroom. The aftermath of the trial brought a flurry of activity. Judge Parker, hearing of Illy's threats, expedited Bridget's petition for divorce, an unusual step given the territory's typically strict divorce laws, but one he deemed necessary given the circumstances. "The law recognizes that marriage should not be a death sentence, Mrs. Thornwood," the judge told her during a private meeting in Sheriff Morris's office. "Given the evidence and the jury's verdict, I am granting your petition on the grounds of extreme cruelty. You will be notified when the decree is finalized, likely within a month." "Thank you, Your Honor," Bridget said, relief washing over her. "What about Illy's threats?" "He'll be closely watched in prison," Sheriff Morris assured her. "And by the time he's released, you'll have built a new life far from his reach, if that's what you choose." A new life. The possibility seemed both terrifying and exhilarating. That evening, Lucas came to the Petersons' home for supper, as had become his custom. After the meal, Martha tactfully suggested that Harold help her inventory some new stock in the back room, leaving Lucas and Bridget alone in the parlor. "You were magnificent today," Lucas said quietly. "Standing up to him like that took real courage." Bridget shook her head. "I was terrified. But I kept thinking of what you said, that I'm not alone anymore. That gave me strength." You've always had strength, Lucas countered. You just needed the chance to remember it. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. Judge Parker says your divorce should be final within a month. Yes, Bridget confirmed, her pulse quickening at the direction of the conversation. I've been thinking about what happens after, Lucas continued, about what we discussed at the cabin. As have I. Lucas took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Bridget, I know it might seem sudden to others. They don't know what we've been through together, how a crisis can reveal a person's true character in ways that years of ordinary interaction might not. I feel I know you the real you just as you know the real me. I believe that too, Bridget said softly. Then, when you're ready, when your divorce is final and you've had time to be certain of your heart, I'd like to court you properly. His eyes never left hers. And if in time you find your feelings match mine, I'd like to ask you to be my wife. Joy bubbled up inside Bridget, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Lucas Northcott, are you planning to propose to me someday? A smile spread across his face, transforming it with happiness. I believe I am, madam, with your permission. Permission granted, she whispered, squeezing his hand. But I should warn you, I already know what my answer will be. The month that followed was one of transition and preparation. Bridget continued working at the general store, saving every penny. Lucas rode into town twice a week, sometimes staying to help Harold with heavy deliveries, other times taking Bridget for rides or walks when weather permitted. Their courtship, though technically waiting for her divorce to be finalized, progressed in every way except physical intimacy. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Lucas spoke of his hopes for his ranch, the cattle herd he was slowly building, the crops he planned to plant come spring. Bridget shared her love of books and teaching, how she had once hoped to follow in her father's footsteps as an educator. Perhaps you still could, Lucas suggested during one of their walks. Colorado City is growing, they'll need more teachers soon. Perhaps, Bridget agreed thoughtfully. Though I find I'm drawn to the idea of building something together. A home, a family, a future. Lucas's eyes softened at her words. Nothing would make me happier. When the official divorce decree arrived in early April, Bridget felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She was free, truly free, for the first time in 5 years. That evening, Lucas arrived at the Petersons' home with a small bouquet of early spring wildflowers. I thought we might celebrate your freedom with a special supper, he suggested, if the Petersons can spare you for the evening. Martha practically shooed them out the door. Go on, you two, enjoy yourselves. We'll expect Bridget back by 9, Mr. Northcott. Lucas grinned. Yes, madam. He took Bridget to the hotel dining room, which had been decorated with fresh linens and spring flowers. The owner, Mrs. Gladwell, had prepared a special meal for the occasion. The whole town is celebrating your fresh start, Lucas explained as they were seated. You've made quite an impression these past months. Bridget blushed, still unaccustomed to such attention. Everyone has been so kind. They recognize strength and grace when they see it, Lucas said simply. After supper, they took a stroll through town in the fading light. Lucas led her to a small bench near the church, overlooking a meadow where the first green shoots of spring were beginning to emerge from the melting snow. It's beautiful, Bridget commented, drawing her shawl closer against the evening chill. It is, Lucas agreed, though his eyes were fixed on her rather than the landscape. Bridget, I've been thinking a lot about timing. She turned to face him, her heart suddenly racing. Oh. I promised to court you properly once you were free, and I meant it. If you need more time, more space to discover who you are without Ellie's shadow hanging over you, I understand completely. But, she prompted, sensing there was more. But I also know my own heart, he continued, taking her hand in his. I've known since that third day you were in my cabin when you insisted on helping me with chores despite your injuries, when you quoted Whitman as we worked, when you laughed at my terrible attempt at biscuits. I knew then what I know with absolute certainty now. And what is that? Bridget whispered, though she already knew the answer. Lucas slid from the bench onto one knee before her, still holding her hand. From his pocket, he withdrew a small ring, a simple band with a modest pearl set in the center. "That I love you, Bridget Thornwood. That I want to spend the rest of my days with you by my side. That finding you at my door was the greatest gift God ever gave me, though it came disguised as tragedy." His voice grew husky with emotion. "I know it hasn't been long in the traditional sense, but I believe some souls recognize each other instantly. Mine recognized yours. Tears of joy spilled down Bridget's cheeks, as mine recognized yours. Then will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need protection or security, but because we choose each other freely and joyfully?" "Yes," Bridget answered without hesitation. "Yes, Lucas Northcott, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and rose to sit beside her again. This time, there were no barriers between them, no reasons to hold back. When his lips met hers in their first kiss, it felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. The town of Colorado City turned out in full force for the wedding of Lucas Northcott and Bridget Thornwood on a perfect day in late May 1880. The ceremony was held in the white clapboard church, decorated with wildflowers and ribbons by Martha Peterson and the Ladies' Auxiliary. Bridget wore a simple gown of ivory silk that Martha and the other women had helped her make, with tiny pearls sewn into the bodice and a crown of spring blossoms in her hair. Lucas, almost unrecognizable in a new black suit, waited at the altar with an expression of such undisguised joy that it brought tears to many eyes. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Thomas began, "we are gathered here today to witness not just the union of two people, but the triumph of love over adversity, of hope over despair, of new beginnings born from endings." As they exchanged vows, Bridget thought of that terrible night in the blizzard, how she had been certain her life was ending, unaware that it was actually just beginning. Lucas's hands were warm and steady as he placed the gold band on her finger, his eyes never leaving hers as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her for all the days of his life. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thomas concluded with a broad smile. "Mr. Northcott, you may kiss your bride." The celebration afterward was the largest the town had seen in years. Tables groaned with food contributed by every family in Colorado City. A small band played lively tunes, and dancing continued well into the evening. Bridget and Lucas moved through it all in a haze of happiness, accepting congratulations and well wishes from neighbors who had become friends. As the sun began to set, they slipped away to begin the journey to their home on Lucas's ranch. The wagon had been decorated with ribbons and flowers, with a sign reading "Just Married" attached to the back. "Ready, Mrs. Northcott?" Lucas asked as he helped her up onto the seat. The name, her new name, sent a thrill through Bridget. "More than ready, Mr. Northcott." The cabin had been transformed in preparation for their return as husband and wife. Lucas had added a second room, expanding the small structure to include a proper bedroom. New curtains hung at the windows, and a handmade quilt, a wedding gift from Martha, adorned the bed. "Welcome home," Lucas said softly as he carried her across the threshold. Bridget looked around at the cabin that had once been her sanctuary and was now her home. "It's perfect," she whispered, pulling her husband down for a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. Epilogue: 10 years later, the summer sun beat down on the prosperous ranch that had grown from Lucas Northcott's modest beginnings. What had once been a small cabin was now a comfortable 2-story home, surrounded by well-tended gardens and outbuildings. A herd of prime cattle grazed in the distance, while closer to the house, a vegetable garden flourished under Bridget's careful tending. "Mama, Mama, come quick." 8-year-old Thomas Northcott came running around the corner of the house, his younger sister Emma following close behind. "Papa says the new foal is about to be born." Bridget smiled at her children's excitement. "Let me fetch Michael, and we'll be right there." Inside the cool interior of the house, she found her youngest, just 2 years old, playing contentedly with wooden blocks on the floor. She scooped him up, his chubby arms automatically winding around her neck. "Come along, little one," she cooed. "We're going to see something special." The barn was cool and dim after the bright sunlight. Lucas stood by a stall where a beautiful chestnut mare lay on a bed of fresh straw, her sides heaving with contractions. He looked up as his family entered, his face breaking into the smile that, even after 10 years of marriage, still made Bridget's heart skip a beat. "Just in time," he said, making room for them at the stall door. "Nature's greatest miracle is about to unfold." Thomas and Emma pressed close, their eyes wide with wonder. Michael squirmed to get down, and Bridget carefully set him on his feet, keeping a firm hold on his hand. As they watched, the mare gave a final push, and the foal slid into the world in a rush of fluid. Lucas quickly moved forward to clear the newborn's nostrils, then stepped back to let the mother do her work. Within minutes, the wobbly-legged foal was attempting to stand, determined despite repeated tumbles. "He's trying so hard," Emma whispered, her 7-year-old face solemn with concentration. "Just like you when you were learning to walk," Lucas told her with a wink. Determination runs in this family. Bridget watched her husband with their children patient, loving, strong, and felt the familiar swell of gratitude that had become a constant undercurrent in her life. From the darkest night of her existence had come this a love and a family beyond anything she had dared to dream. Later, with the children tucked into bed and the day's work complete, Bridget and Lucas sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in shades of orange and gold. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, a position as familiar and necessary as breathing. "Happy?" Lucas asked softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Bridget smiled, thinking of the frightened, frozen woman who had collapsed on his doorstep a decade ago. How far she had come, how much love she had found. "Completely," she answered, tilting her face up for a proper kiss. "Thanks to a blizzard and a cowboy with a warm heart." Lucas chuckled against her lips. "Best night of my life finding you at my door." "Mine too," Bridget whispered. "Mine too." As the sun sank below the horizon, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms and the quiet contentment of a love that had been forged in ice but burned with the warmth of eternity.